Oh, I was in the audience for this one. 2018. That was my first React talk.
Oh, was it? Oh, dang. Is that when the no, that's not the hooks one. That's another one.
No, Hooks was later in 2018.
Nice. All right. I'll just clap. Rounding out our week talking about programming abstractions, this is a heavy hitter that honestly got me into React and programming back in college. Take from KC Dodds called Simply React, but really it's just simple abstractions that you can use in anything. He calls it inversion of control. It's something that I've quoted quite often. And it was a pattern that worked well even before React hooks and the way that they do state today. And the pattern still holds for the components that you write all the time. So front end, back end, anyone. I think it's pretty evergreen advice.
Emotion's great. Thank you, Kai. All right, let's jump into it. Here's the component that we're going to be walking along and learning about. It's an accordion. So you can open up these different items in the accordion. It's kind of cool. So when you, let's pretend for a second that you were tasked with building this. They gave you this design. They said, we want to be able to open these different things and close them. And each one of these has contents. We have this hand that we want to turn direction based on whether it's open. And so you say, great. And you are like, I'm loving this whole React thing. I can put my state right in there. And I can update the state when they click on it. It's so easy. And your API for this thing looks like this. I added a note about the theme and font so nobody asks me about it. Yeah, so that's Sarah Drasner created this theme that everybody loves. It's awesome, called Night Owl. And Phil, and I can't say his last name, I'm sorry, is Dankmano, so that's the font, and it's awesome. OK, so you build this component, and you're super excited because it encapsulates all this logic. And then somebody comes around and says, hey, that is a really cool component there. I would like to use it. And you say, awesome. Isn't that cool? With React, we can do this. And they say, yeah, but I have a different use case. I need things to be rendered above. Can you make it render above? And you say, yeah, sure. We'll just have some conditional logic here to render the contents above. We'll have some conditional logic for the hand, that direction that it's pointing. And all it's going to take is for you to add above equals true. So easy, right? And if you want to be super terse and you don't care about JSX version 2, then you can just say above all by itself. And you don't need the equals true. How easy could it be? And so you're feeling pretty good about this. Like you've built something, people are starting to use it. And then somebody says, hey, I saw how you changed it so it could support above and below. I want it to support the contents on the right, tabs on the left. Is that a cool thing? Like, can we do that? And you say, yeah, sure, we can do that. Just write equals true. And now we just have some conditional logic. We had to rewrite it a little bit because it was flexbox before. And now we're going to do CSS grid, grid autoflow column. And now, like magic, it's so easy. Thank you, CSS grid, for making that easy to do. And you're starting to get a little uncomfortable because this render method is getting bigger. And have some conditional logic. As you're adding these features, you have to add some tests to feel comfortable with things. And of course, you're using React testing library. But even with that, it's starting to make you feel a little uncomfortable. And of course, somebody comes to you and says, hey, I noticed you could do right. Can I also do left? And you say, yeah, sure, just left is true, and life is good. And then David Khorshid, yes, David Khorshid, K Piano Man, he reminds you that, hey, this is like impossible states. We got left is true. What if I did right is true as well? What happens now? And so you refactor it, well, you rewrite it, and everybody's happy about this. You change position equals left. So now you got an enum. So everything's good. So there's a little lesson. Yeah, use
no
enums. Don't make impossible states possible. So now everybody's happy with that. They're feeling pretty good. So the next thing that happens is somebody comes to you, and you're feeling pretty uncomfortable about this render method. It's getting pretty big. And somebody comes to you, and the first thing that they say is like, hey, that's really cool. And you're like, wait, stop. Do you want me to change it? And they say, yeah. And you're like, OK, what is it? And they say, well, the way that it renders is fine. And you're like, oh, good. OK, so wait, what do you want me to change? Well, the logic with how I can open all of these at once, I actually only want to be able to open one at a time. Is that something you can do? And you say, yeah, I guess so. Like, I leave my render method as it is. I don't need to touch that. I just need to touch, like, or deal with the code that's handling the click here. And so you say, OK, just a little if statement to make that possible. And now we can only open one at a time. That wasn't all that bad. Now we have the single true, and that's fine, no big deal. And somebody comes to you again and says, hey, I noticed we can actually change the state. I've had this like bug for a long time. People shouldn't be able to close all of the items. I need to, like, they can open as many as they want, but they can only close down to one. So only one, or one has to be open at all times. So you say, OK, yeah, I can make that happen. I click here. It doesn't actually close. Can only close down to one at a time. And that's prevent close is true. OK. Yeah, so now you have a bunch of conditional logic in your render method. You've got some conditional logic in your click handler. It's not too bad, but you're starting to feel a little uncomfortable about this. And then somebody comes to you and says, hey, you know how like that single one open at a time, can I combine that with opening only one? So I can only open one at a time, but I can't close it. Is that possible? And you say, yeah, that's possible. We can make that work. So I can't close this, and I can only open one at a time. You just use both of the props. And so you're so happy because just naturally out of nowhere, it's supported. And so you're like, oh, sweet. I don't have to change anything ever again because it supports all the use cases in the world. And then somebody's looking at this, and they're playing around with it, and they say, huh, we got something we click on, and then it shows some contents. It only shows one at a time. That looks like a different component that I need to build. How about a tabs UI? One at a time. Yeah. Can we make a tabs UI out of this? And you say, no. My render is too complicated already. And they say, no, listen. It is just an if statement. And you say, I've heard that before. It's never just an if statement. And they say, no, listen, I promise. It's just, so at the top of your render method, if this.props.tabs, return this.renderTabs. And we'll put all that logic for the tabs rendering in a different method. And I won't have to touch the rest of your render method. So it'll be so easy. And you need to ship stuff, right? We need to ship stuff. Michael Chan told us this morning we just got to ship, and I believe that. So we'll have a tabs prop. But inside, you're feeling like somebody's betrayed you and sad. And then somebody comes and says, hey, could I render those tabs about? And that's when you really say no. And they copy and paste your code and make a tabs component. And now everybody's sad because you have duplicate code all over the place. But you're shipping, so that's good. So I really want to drive home that the importance of shipping is, it's more important to ship than to do all the things I'm going to teach you. But what if we could ship and not feel terrible about our code at the same time? That's what I'm going for here. So let's extrapolate this a little bit further. I think you're getting the idea. This does not stop, ever. So you continue to add things like, now you're changing your data to map to features of your accordion. So these are basically more props. Disabled is false. Now we have an open title. We have this, like the props that we had before, but now we have an open trigger. What if you want to open on focus and close on blur? And then maybe we have a title class name and a contents class name, so we can customize the styling. And now I need to know when the user's triggering, so I can fire off analytics and the close class name, open class name. And here's one of my favorites. Anything that's prefixed with render is my favorite prop. Render expand all button. Render cows when the sun is up. Like whatever it is, because we don't have any control over rendering and you want to share this logic around, you're going to have these render-specific props. So here are the reasons why this is a problem, beyond just like feeling frustrated yourself and always having to come back to this accordion that's getting worse and worse. Bundle size and perf take a hit. So initially we made like this 30-line accordion component that was so simple, and it's pretty small. But now, to support all of these use cases, it's grown to 200 or 500 lines of code. And in your app, you don't need that. You need 30 of those lines. So like if you could tree shake code within a component, you would do that, but you can't. So you're shipping a ton of code to your users that you're never actually using. And in addition to that, like maybe other parts of the app are using it, but maybe entirely different apps are using it. So they're suffering for your use cases as well.
So this is a material UI attack.
Not really very fun to maintain. You have to worry about documentation. Yeah. You have to worry about answering people's questions about these different props that you're supporting, because they're all really kind of single use case specific. And you add a new prop to every single use case that people come up with that you haven't thought of before. So it's not fun to maintain. Implementation complexity increases, and that has a correlation with bugs that enter the code base. So as people come in to contribute, which of course you're going to have other people contribute their use cases, right? Because you don't want to touch it anymore. But they have to learn about all the use cases that are already being supported. So it's harder to contribute, and bugs sneak in a lot easier because this component is so complex. And the API, this is probably my biggest beef with this props explosion that we're seeing here. Is you have to document each one of these props, and everybody who comes in to use your component has to read every single one of those props to figure out whether those props are necessary for their use case. And that is not fun. The examples are always out of date because now there's this new prop that does this better. And so all this just makes everybody sad and highlighted somehow. There we go. So I was when I was researching for this talk, I asked Twitter. Some of you may have responded. What is the reusable component that you've used that has the most number of props? And the winner was a 60 prop component that's open source. I'm not going to name names because that would be mean. But it has 60 props, and then there are some props that are specific, like options props, which you're not kidding anybody. Those are just more props. It's like this object that has like 30 options. Like, yeah, you just added 30 props to your component for all intents and purposes. And somebody responded to that tweet and said, her name's Jen Creighton, I call that an apropcalypse. Yeah. Thank you, Jen. Made the world a better place with a new hashtag. So what if I told you all of those demos that you saw were built on the same 37-line component that supports all of those use cases in 37 lines? Go ahead really quick. Try to implement the whole thing in 37 lines. OK, are you done? OK, let's take a look. Good job. So I don't want you to focus too much on the specific implementation here. But there are two patterns that exist in this implementation that enable this kind of flexibility and simplicity. And we're going to look at how to use this component more. But here we're using render props, which have really taken steam in the community. You've probably heard of them. It's this.props.children. We're just calling that as a function. We pass it our state and a mechanism for updating our state. And now people can render whatever they like. And then we're also using a state reducer, which is one you might not be familiar with, that enables users to change the state as it's being updated. So it can modify how the state updates happen. So both of these patterns are actually implementations of a concept called inversion of control. And what that basically means is normally with a library, you're going to call into the library. Like you're going to call to get to render a React component or something. Inversion of control is where the library calls back into the user code to say, hey, I'm going to be doing this thing. What do you want me to do about that? And you can make modifications to it. So let's take a look at a demo. Thank you, Evis, for Code Sandbox. Who loves Code Sandbox? Yeah.
Back when that was the thing.
Back when that was the thing. I mean, hey, Code Sandbox is making strides, but
yeah,
StackBlitz is what I've been using because it's just more stable. It's less CPU intensive.
It's full stack.
Good. Yeah, we use it for the Astro issues template. And just say, go to astro.new/basics, spins up a StackBlitz, generate a link, send it back to us. That's our repro. And it's so good. But every time it's a sandbox link, it doesn't work. So, yeah, opinions.
Opinions.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you meant to like play the rest of the talk. I know you were going to jump around a little bit. But yeah, I consider this his best talk of the ones that I've seen. It's the example is really good. It just so happens this pattern that he's showing right now on screen with basically telling people to just use children more. Mm-hmm. That's really it, which is like, hey, children's a very good way to compose things. You're doing too much within your function. You should like only do the core logic and separate the presentation logic inside of to be done inside of the children class. Sorry, the children of the components. I think that makes a lot of sense and happens to be the exact same pattern that you need to use for React Server components. Right.
Yep. Yeah. It kind of just naturally happens. And I do think another thing is ownership of state, which he doesn't really talk about here, but I've used this pattern all the time because I used to, whenever I'm building something interactive, put all the use state inside of the interactive component. And inevitably, when you do that, you have to invent a life cycle of here's what happens when it closes. Here's what happens when this reducer updates the state. Here's what happens when this happens. And that creates a lot of props that are just callback handlers to say on this, on this, on this. And if you just hoist that state out of the component and pass in the getter and setter, then you don't need a lifecycle anymore because now the person calling the component has the state. They can listen to that state if they want to, and they can see when it's open or closed so that they can like show a different icon for the close button, for example, which comes up all the time for slide outs and whatever. You don't want like an on close and then try to update your own state variable. It's like state updating state. Like just pass the state in. Stop trying to own it. Because especially if it's reusable, I've seen this with web components too, where it's just, there's no render props in components. There's no state in web components. So you have to invert all the control up. Otherwise, the web component is just this locked box of nothing. Yeah.
Makes sense. Cool.
Yeah. I only thought of that because of the tabs component also, because Dave Rupert, who on the Shop Talk show, he's a member of the
committee that does
UI.
these things.
Yes. They were working on spicy divs, which was a creative way to take a set of headers and content and turn them into tabs with progressive enhancement. And it's so clever, but it is that feeling of, oh, you have this details view. Let me turn that into tabs. And all of the implications of what props do I need? How do I listen to the tab opening and closing? They rear back up. I kind of feel like tabs are best served by a hook or some JavaScript logic. I don't know if a perfectly enhanced tab view web component is possible, but yeah, you just end up with that when you're trying to use the platform, which doesn't have any of these patterns, like children, render props. None of that exists. So you have to work around the system in weird ways.
You also notice a new form of separation of concerns. I don't know what to name this. I feel like someone like you could diagram how this is different from the HTML, CSS, JS separation of concerns. I think this is kind of like a business logic presentation layer type of separation. I feel like there's something there. I can't quite articulate it yet.
Yeah, I can't either. And with server components, it's also getting really confusing because, I've talked about this where client context is gone, and that's going to break like every library.
Apparently not. I don't know. Dan had this thread yesterday.
I know.
This is the obviously the official React server components Twitter account is just Dan, and so he said like client components isn't. I'm not going to look at it for another 2 years, and then I'll come back to it when it's done.
That's what everyone should be doing. Because I do Next.js on stream just for fun, trying the app directory, see what Astro could learn or steal. And I always get at least 1 or 2 people saying, I'm learning Next, where do I get started? And my answer is click the old docs button and learn that. Please don't go through their app directory tutorial yet, because if you're a newbie, you need those 4 years of blog posts about Next.js to power you through. I don't think learning server components like right now.
I've written some of those blog posts, and I don't feel on top of it. So.
I know. I'm not going to say the new patterns are just better for like passing server props, like, of course. But it's I'm sensitive to libraries and blog posts available, and you got to mention AI every time. Maybe it changes that. It could just generate posts about this stuff so that we don't have to wait 4 years for KCD Dodds to make a course about it. Because that's kind of how React built up until now.
Yeah, well, actually, Kent usually makes courses too early. He actually got in trouble with the React core team because there was a group of us who had an early preview of hooks, and we're explicitly told to not make content about it because that would be unfair to other content creators. And then hooks release, and Kent goes, all right, guys, I have a 36-hour course that I've done for you.
Oh my God.
It's obviously he had prepped, and I don't think the React core team was very happy about it.
Oh no. Yeah, but now there's this schism where he's doing a web development course, but it's Remix and server rendering patterns. Server components are nowhere in it, and probably won't be on principle.
Good. No, honestly, I like that. It means that he believes in it, and he's he thinks he wants to make the best course available for it. Good for him. Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of griftiness that comes to content creation where you only do the thing that will get you the most views, and he's intentionally choosing less views. For sure. But because he believes in it, this is great.
Yeah. He's said that about clickbait in general. It's always been his MO. And for company level courses, makes sense.
Good.
Okay. We can play the last 2 minutes of this. We don't have to watch the rest of the code demo. Most of it's been revealed, but up to 17 minutes.
Cool. This thing is the coolest thing. Okay, so here's our accordion. And our base accordion is that component that you saw earlier. So this is our implementation that builds out our accordion. So with the base accordion, we're just accepting some items, and then we spread the rest of the props so we can override some of the accordion or base accordion's props. So the user of accordion can override the base accordion's props. And then we're providing our children as a function or our render prop. And that's taking our open indexes and our handle item click. And from there on out, it's totally our responsibility. So this is actually a significantly more difficult to use API than this, right? You have a lot more work to do. This is what inversion of control is. It's giving you control and responsibility. But because of React's composition model, you can actually, now I can use this accordion like I used that first accordion. It's just call accordion, pass it some items. And the cool thing about this is that I can use React's composition model to create that, and then I can keep adding more logic to this accordion to make it support all the different use cases we were talking about without making any changes to the base accordion. And why that is neat is because if this accordion doesn't support the use case that I have, I can just go copy all of this code and go make my own implementation. And this code to copy is actually pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of logic going on, and it's less painful to copy. In an accordion example, like the accordion's 37 lines, downshift, for example, is a lot longer than 37 lines of code. And so there's a lot more code that we can share there, and then we can duplicate the specific rendering so that we can have our specific use cases. So anyway, let's say I build this thing, and then the coworker comes and says, hey, that's a pretty cool accordion you got there, Kent. What can I do about having it render the contents above the button? You say, literally just take these emotion components. These are just like style components, like styled components kind of thing. Just take these components and move them. And you're done. Yeah, thanks. You're not quite done, because this emoji's pointing the wrong way, so we'll just point up. And now it's pointing the right way. That was Alfred. Somebody's going to ask me. That was Alfred. So cool. And then somebody says, hey, I want to render.
Yeah, he walks through a few more examples of just bumping code around based on coworker asks. But I've seen this a lot with inverted design systems these days. There are a lot of styleless systems. Radix UI is a big one. Reach UI is the one that I tried a while back. And you just end up with really basic components and other components that share whatever context it has. Like a tabs component has tabs, and then tab, and tab view for each of the views within it. It's hard to name generic things, but it doesn't have any styles attached to it. Because these days, no one's using emotion like he's suggesting here. People have moved on to style components, and honestly, a lot of people have moved on to Tailwind at this point in order to have more control over how styles are applied. So yeah, I think people, I think people caught on a lot to let's just not bundle stuff into our libraries, and people actually appreciate that. They just want the accessibility stuff fixed, because like building a tab view that announces to a screen reader what's on the screen, that's very annoying to build. I built one at my last company just to see how it worked. And I had to go through the Axe dev tools and an accessibility audit where I had to go through a week-long feedback loop. It's not worth it if you can outsource it. I just couldn't get a green light on bringing a design system into our design system. But if you can, I think it's definitely growing where abstractions don't do as much for you anymore. And it's kind of on you to bring whatever flavor coat of paint that you want to add, and also positioning. So yeah, definitely in favor of it.
I don't know. I just have to commend you on, this is the first series of 5 episodes that we are curating, and you've picked a really good range of videos to recap. I think it really covers the spectrum of advice on abstractions. I think if people study this closely, they will come away with a lot. It may seem like fluffy, I don't know, waffling about meta concerns around code.
Meta commentaries really, like that, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it does help us decide how to do what we do, because if we don't spend any time thinking about doing this right, then we just do the first thing that comes to mind, and that may not be the right path for that situation. I think it's just good or advisable for most people to just have an arsenal of each of these people are programming legends, and having them in your head sometimes for the right situation is super helpful. So yeah, great picks, man. Like, couldn't ask for a better start.
Thank you. From the pick master. I mean, hey, it means a lot. I mean, I've definitely curated most of my podcast just off of what the mixtape has. So
yeah. Well, this is what a mixtape is meant to do. Like we're reviewing the great reviewing game tape is kind of how I think about it. Like, I'm not a sports guy. All the sports ball stuff is like exactly the same to me. But I've been told that reviewing game tape is how you get better at your craft, and programmers need to review game tape.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah. Because I don't think anyone's rewatching like KCD 2018, but
it is one of his best. I think he may have had another one that was a really hit, like 2019 one about testing. And then like recently, recently, like, you know, he's more improvising, I think. But this one, I think I really liked it. Just it was a very clear example that everyone has faced. So yeah.
Totally.
Cool.